So I'm going to do a glue up, but one thing I didn't take into consideration is, do I have enough distance between here and like the riser on my MikroBench? Now, if I didn't, I was two options. One is I do have longer clamps. I have some 24 inchers. These are 14s. I have some 24s. I could just take these off and put those on, or I could remove the tray 2 and tray 3 and these risers, and then I definitely would have enough distance. So it's something to take into consideration on the design for sure. So all I got to do now is just, I think I had a 4-incher or 5-incher in there before. It does that when it hits glue, old glue. No big deal. Other than keep the glue off, right? Actually, it's not going to fit. So, because I can see right now, I need about another inch, and it's hitting the clamp is fine, but it's hitting the riser. And so I think what I'll do is I'll just take the riser off, and then that'll give me with the space that I need. All right, so that took about, I'm going to say 2 minutes, maybe something like that. But now I don't have that riser to deal with, and I will definitely have enough room in here. I just need to expand these a little bit yet, and we'll be good to go. So a little bit of Gorilla Glue, and I'm going to be as careful as I can to not get any of it on the wood on the outside, but I'll be also exactly the same carefulness will be applied when getting it on all of the edges inside here, because when these pieces go in there, they're not perfect fit, because this is some pretty rough stuff, right? If I was working with a fine woodworking or something, they would be perfect, but they're not, because this is rustic stuff. So I want the Gorilla Glue to ooze up, but not craziness. The other thing is I don't want to have big puddles of it, because then there's way too much pressure trying to push, especially these guys, it would tend to push them up, I think, you know, because it's going to rise, right? So I'm just hoping that the side of each of those, the glue on the side, dries basically as fast as the glue underneath it, and so that it doesn't push them up. They don't float to the surface, basically. All right, so starting on the other end, I put the board in. Now I'm just going to snug that clamp just enough that it can't work its way out, because there's a 3/8 inch dado, 3/8 inch or mortise, 3/8 inch mortise, right? So as long as I have it close, it can't pop out. But yet I still have some room on this end to continue sliding these in, hopefully. If not, then I have to loosen that other one up. But nope, it looks like it's going to work just fine. And then again, I'm going to put my filler strip in there, tuck it up. What I should do is even put a little bit of glue. I could put a little glue, if I really was doing this for like a customer or client, then I would actually put a little glue on the tip here, and that way where it butts into the web, then that Gorilla Glue would ooze up in there as well. It would just take a lot more to clean up and stuff. Okay, so now it's time to even close this guy up just a little bit. This one has a bunch of glue on it, I think. It does. It has a bunch of glue on it. That's my fault. keep on doing this, working these things in. Okay, now there is a possibility that it could be out of square. And I'm going to check it, but I'm going to start tightening it first a little bit. Again, and then just I'm working the ends. There's like a little bit too much, not enough here. There we go. I'm just going to keep on working those gradually tighter and tighter, but not too tight until I get them all perfectly aligned. So this MikroBench is 24 inches long. The piece I'm doing is like 32 or something. So I'm pretty much capped out on width. If I was doing this again for a customer or whatever, then what I would end up doing is putting 2 MikroBenches next to it, or in a series. But it works really well to just put additional clamps on. You can set them on freely. They're just going to be where you want them to be. This guy, and then I'm seeing a little bit of push out on these guys. I think that glue underneath is pushing those things out. So at some point I'll put a clamp on those as well. But I think they're good for right now. Okay, so that is all that's going to happen for tonight. It's about 6 o'clock. That way they can sit overnight. I had questioned whether or not I should put a round over on these, because if you do, you want to typically do it before assembly because you can't get the router in there now, right? But I decided I would leave them to be pretty rustic, and then I'll probably just hit those with a sander just to take that edge off, because otherwise the round over on rustic type stuff changes the texture and it becomes the smooth spot, and it's so much smoother than the rest of the piece of wood, and it just, to me, sometimes it doesn't look quite right. So I sometimes avoid the round over and would rather taper that change of texture with a sander. And again, I'm seeing some of these things want to work their way out, so I am going to put some clamps on those. So it seemed like just these 3 on that side were doing that, whereas the ones down here, they're not coming out at all. So I don't think I need to put clamps on those. If I do, I still have plenty of time to do that because there's a lot of working time. So basically that's it for the glue up part of it. All right, so let's just see where we're at on this one. This is prototype number 2, scenario number 2. So I'm going to pull out my MikroBench. Okay, so what I'm going to look at here is kind of like where we're at so far, what went right, what went wrong so far, and a couple of things. One is, if you recall, I was concerned about whether these little fillers would start pushing their way out, because there's Gorilla Glue in there, and Gorilla Glue expands, and those are pretty small, right? So, well, it did. And so after I turned the camera off before, I did go back and put these clamps on there, which immediately stopped it. And it's not really a big issue, but what I didn't want to have to deal with is 2 different thicknesses of material here, and then having to sand those all down, because I'm not going to be able to run this through the jointer anymore, the planer, at least that part of it. and I didn't want to have to sand all that thickness of hardwood, right? So I went through that effort of putting that stuff on there. So then I'm going to take the clamps apart. I've got all the manual clamps, and then I've got the R&R clamps. So I'm going to take all those off now. So when we talk about things that went wrong, right, that'll come off, but you can see the issue that I'm starting to have a little bit there with this, with using too much Gorilla Glue, using Gorilla Glue on some parts like that. I'll figure it out. But anyhow, it's just kind of fun to see how things turn out. Sometimes, again, that's Gorilla Glue for you. They tighten up too much, and even the impact doesn't want to loosen it up, and I didn't want to force it. So then it's usually just coming down to using this. I'll cover this at some point, but this is the perfect wrench for these, because you can go like this, right? And then even if they're on the ground or in a difficult location, you can spin them. To me, this is the perfect wrench. It works a lot better than a ratchet, and certainly works better than an open end or whatever. So this is the guy to be looking for. I covered this in other points, but when you have the clamps in there, when it's in the clamp anyhow, leave it in there if you can, and then let the clamp do the holding for you while you start on taming the Gorilla with the clamp, or with the scraper. And then again, I'll cover this elsewhere in my materials, but these are my favorite go-to scrapers. Again, I'm not sponsored by anybody, so what I say I mean. These are the Hides, the bend chisel scraper. The extra heavy duty 3-inch is the one that I've been using, and that also comes into play in the design of the actual I-beam itself, because when we get into the basic unit, which is the well, what did I call that? You know, the bottom one, the lowest level of the default. But you want to be able to get that in there, right? This is if this is the scraper, that's what we're shooting for, is to make sure that that I-beam gets in there at just a slightly larger than the scraper itself. But getting at here is this: if you do it with just a little bit, you know, I just had shoulder surgery 12 months ago, 12 weeks ago, you know, serious stuff. So I'm a little more tender, but as long as you kind of give it a little bit of a oomph like this, you can usually get right underneath there and see how this is coming right out. That, you know, was a part of the clamp that got stuck in there. Okay, so I got quite a bit of it on the one side, again, with just a couple of the clamps doing all my holding for me. So now I'm loosening those up. I'm going to flip it over, put it back in, and then just tighten up like 2 of them. That'll be enough. Okay, so this is, to me, I call it taming the Gorilla, and because of Gorilla Glue, right? Okay, so I'm using the clamps and the MikroBench to support my work while I'm using that scraper, because again, a lot of times with the scraper, you have to like dive into it to kind of break that seal between the Gorilla Glue. But if you look at this now, there's really very little Gorilla Glue left. And the rest of that we are going to sand down, which is the same thing you would do anyhow, But the whole key is to me is 2 points. One is having this scraper. It makes a huge difference. Number 2 is not following the instructions on the Gorilla Glue, because I think everywhere you look, they're telling you to wet the surface first. And I'm sorry, but I hope, you know, Gorilla Glue is okay me saying this, but I'm not paid by them anyhow. So I never wet it. And because what it does is by keeping it just regular, you have enough moisture content in the wood as it is, but what happens is it seems to allow more time for it to set, so it gives you more set time for moving things around, and it also seems to make it expand more. I don't know if that's true or not, but and I like that because then it fills the voids and it gets a pretty decent, you know, set. So what I'm going to be doing next is there's always going to be Gorilla Glue coming out the ends, but this is why if you're going to do a 48-inch rail, for instance, you want to make them at 47.5 or something like that, depending on where you're going to fit this. But that way we can just basically cut this off later, and we can do that in a couple of different ways. I'll show you that. One of them, a really good way to do it is with a track saw. If it gets too wide, then you're not going to be able to do that. Then we'll have some other options available to you. So that's where we're at as far as removing the prototype number 2 from the clamps. And again, this is a prototype, so that's why you're seeing some holes and things like that on here, but this will give us a good feel where we're at.